So, John, what does self-love mean to you?
I think it's a deep acceptance of uh I think it's a deep acceptance of even the hard things. I think at my best, I know I'm doing well when I'm even thankful for the hard challenges or the things I'm not like particularly, things I wish I could change. Um, not stewing in, oh, I should have done this differently 10, 20 years ago, or thinking, oh, like remember that time when if I just done this, not that. Like I feel like for me it's a lot of staying out of that. Oh, I like that could have gone better this way or that, but really looking at being conscious of the kinds, when you talk about internal questions, like being conscious of the kinds of internal questions I'm asking myself. From what I mean, from this whole idea, I mean, I think these internal questions are extremely habitual, and they're largely go under the radar screen. And I do think it is like the foundation of how, the perspective from which we see ourselves. I know a lot of people point to the surface things like, oh, are you exercising? Are you sleeping? Are you eating, drinking water? Are you doing, those kind of things? And I think those to me are like symptoms of that deeper, kindness, that internal dialogue to ourselves. I'm not sure what it's so complex, humanity is so complex. I'm not sure what is the driver of the show. Do the questions, drive, to what degree do the questions drive the show? Or if you go and drink water, get exercise, get good sleep, eat nutritious food, do those things lead to better questions? Like which comes first? I don't know. But I think that's, to me, those internal questions seem to be central to almost everything.
Okay, so internal questions is a state of appreciation. I was hearing self-forgiveness, perhaps self-trust. What components of self-love can coaches coach or use with their clients in sessions?
Yeah, I've been impressed, Raj, on what you've said about this too. I mean, especially with your working with executive, your expertise working with executive clients. So I'm kind of curious, actually. What are what are your questions? That, I mean, this, I feel like this is something that you emphasize a lot in your work.
Yeah, so the main component of the work that I do with executive leaders and when I do group coaching as well, we look at leadership starts with self. And when we're looking at leadership starts with self, we're looking at those facets of emotional intelligence, which start with self-awareness, self-regulation, moving on to social awareness, and then relationship management. But we spend a lot of time around this self-awareness piece. And what does it mean to understand yourself? What does it mean to like yourself? And then moving on to that self-love. What does self-love look like? And often I've had kind of kickback from people around, well, it seems selfish, especially women leaders that I work with. It seems really selfish to focus on self-love, or almost narcissistic in a sense. So when we start to drill down and look at self-love, it's always around that self-trust bit. For me, I ask myself the question around how much do I trust myself? Do I have my own back? Because when I do, and I'm aligned to my values, I know that I've done the best that I can in a day. And I can put my head on the pillow and sleep at night. So we always use a values tool. We start to have a look at, what are your values? How does it align to who you are as a person? And then connecting it further with giving yourself permission to be you,
Mm-hmm.
and not shifting and changing that based on what the world says, or what a leader should look like. What I've loved when I work with women in groups, and sometimes I use the quote from Wizard of Oz, Glinda the Good Witch, and she says, "You always had the power, my dear." Because we're not asking people when I'm running the programs to change who they are. It might
Right.
be an upgrade. You've got to learn to know who you are, understand who you are, and love who you are, and then think about where you want to take that next.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's so cool. It's so cool.
So, why do you think it's important to talk about self-love in leadership training?
I think anytime something's trying to do something new, something that they've never done before, perhaps something that no human has ever done before, in this sense, there's going to be mistakes. There's going to be things that you don't know yet. And these blind spots or these unknowns, they do have a cost. And it can be somewhat painful not to get to that, not to get the understanding that was needed to be in place. And so there's this, it feels a little bit like a race, like a race for understanding, a race for learning, a race for right action, a race for communication. But anytime there's a race, there's going to be costs involved where, okay, do this, not that. And that decision-making process has to happen sometimes really quickly. So when in that space, you have to take risk, and there's going to be mistakes. And it's just the cost of doing business. I remember once, I think I told the story, I don't know, probably a dozen times. I know I'm going to be one of those people who tells my grandchildren at some point in time the same story 20 times. I'm going to tell it again. So a college buddy, or a high school buddy, we're in college, I'm visiting him in Connecticut. I leave one of my favorite blazers at this place. And we're back at his apartment. I realize this and I'm bummed out. He looks at me and says, that's just the cost of doing business. And that concept was new to me at that time. And he explained it to me. I said, all right, I get it. I understand it. But I think any of that as a leader, self-love, it's you have to accept that mistakes are going to happen. It's just the cost of doing business. Even something happened last night. There was a miscommunication between somewhere in our family. It wasn't a big thing, but and it was. And you just realize, there's a communication between parents and coordination, like who was going to watch the little guys and this thing. And it's just it was no one's fault directly. It just was the cost of doing business. If you're going to operate between 8 different people, 3 different families, like there can be, and it's just, so don't feel bad about it. Yeah. I mean, maybe with optimal communication, you could have been avoided, but there's no way to predict that. There's no way to predict that family, C was going to offer, this, but then that didn't work out because, what I mean? So in life, there are going to be costs of doing business, costs of doing life. Accept it. And I feel like that's where the self-love comes in, because you can beat yourself up relentlessly. Or you cannot. Learn and move on.
Learning, moving on, asking
Self-love.
internal questions, self-love.
That's self-love. Yeah. From a leadership standpoint, and it's not that you don't care or you're in it, because the problem is, like, sometimes if you get too in it, then it becomes a, if you get attached, to the regret or, the internal beating up, it comes out sideways. It doesn't resolve. But if you go, okay, cool, what can I learn from this and move on? Then it becomes something where you can just do it, move on.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it has to happen, or else you can't emotionally do it. You just can't be in it. And that's what I see when I talk to a lot of, like, when I was doing executive coaching, this idea of self-love is a lot of it around grace, around this, past decisions, but then using the learning to inform future action.
And from my experience, what I've found is the more appreciation I can have for myself, the more I can learn from things, the more I'm able to forgive, the happier and content I am. I show up very differently for others. I am less judgy and I have more empathy. What I've learned is that when I have empathy for myself and acknowledge myself, it's much easier for me to be like that for other people as well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.